Lauren Lister, author of New Media, says video games enable an interaction between the player and the plot. In other words, this experience is unique from reading a novel or watching a movie because players have control of how the story unfolds. In this video, we will analyze how the Steam game Deponia allows players to experience working class struggles that are representative of 19th century social conditions. Deponia, a 2D side-scroller game, incorporates a form of steampunk, or a theme that revolves around older generation technology and historical artifacts rather than a futuristic or modern gaming aesthetic. Deponia is centered around the character Rufus, a comical hero who dreams of escaping his village, Kvok, located in Deponia, a world filled to the brim with trash. Deponia interestingly allows players to experience the struggles of the 19th century social conditions. We will analyze how Deponia forces the player into experiencing the class struggles of the 19th century through 1. Its forced interactivity, whether it's through character communication or through task completion. 2. Its separation of different characters into distinctive classes. And 3. Its contrasting settings between the upper and lower classes. Here we start with Deponia's gameplay. It revolves around two components, solving puzzles and interacting with characters. While Deponia's click-based gameplay allows for player interactivity, it's only to a limited extent. Deponia forces the player to follow a specific path during the game in a certain order before continuing to the next stage, in which the player's decision simply does not influence the game. A clear example of this is shown here, where the player must help Rufus find a way to enter an abandoned vehicle, but must first clean the windshield before learning that he needs to find a way to get into the locked truck. Afterwards, Rufus has to get a set of keys from an NPC, an unplayable character, in the game, and I stress has to in order to advance in the game.
Yeah, I'm so happy I could just explode. Really?
Another example is shown here, where Rufus has to pack his toothbrush before his attempt to leave Kvok. What seemed to be an incredibly simple task turned into a complicated sequence of events. Upon finding the toothbrush, it runs away. In order to catch the toothbrush, the player first has to use a plunger to remove a wooden board that was stuck, and upon doing so, they will find a mousetrap. Afterwards, they will have to wash a jar that was covered in oil, where they can then put the wasabi peas that were found on the couch into it. Afterwards, they can then arm the mousetrap by putting the wasabi peas on there. Only then would the player be able to use the arm device to capture the toothbrush, and finally finish packing to resume progress through the game. It's these unnecessary complicated ideologies of the game that show the entrapment of not only Rufus, but also of the working class during the Victorian era. So, how does this all relate to Victorian society? Well, the forced interactivity of the game essentially causes the player to assume the role of a working class member without the ability to improve the situation. The player's freedom within the game is limited to the developer's intended plot, reflecting the restricted nature of the working class. Since there is no option but to follow the author's intended path, a relation to the working class members can be made since they cannot improve their lives no matter how hard they tried. In this way, the video game allows the player to have a virtual understanding of the working class struggles. For example, Lister believes the use of difficult and often unnecessary puzzles challenges the player to think of creative solutions in order to advance past the stage of the game in which players lose constantly. Deponia highlights the working class struggles by not allowing game progression without finishing the complicated puzzles that Rufus comes across. Looking into Rufus's design and personality as a character, he is seen as having a loser personality and being selfish, self-centered, and very egocentric. His belief that he is destined to escape the lower class drives the entire plot of Deponia. However, everyone that knows him mocks him for his belief of escape. Here we can see standing next to Rufus, Tony, his ex-girlfriend. Tony speaks to Rufus in a very derogatory way by constantly insulting him for his lack of manhood and being jobless.
Yeah, right. Rufus is doing a selfless deed. I would love to laugh, but my belly's still aching from when you were dragged through the junk.
I'll show you. I'll wake the girl, and she'll take me to Elysium, and then you'll be sorry. You'll all be sorry.
Now, these insults may be entertaining for those of us playing the game. However, these characteristics of Rufus are common in lower-class Victorian society. Tony's pestering is a constant reminder that machines are taking away his job. With this, we can understand the feeling that many unemployed Victorian working-class men in the same position as Rufus may have felt, in addition to understanding how Rufus was not deemed respectable by other characters in the game. According to Masters, author of The Respectability of Late Victorian Workers, the Victorian middle class classified a respectable man as one willing to work hard and be a breadwinner and public wage earner. The lack of these characteristics in Rufus foreshadows its inevitable failure in raising his class. So we have picked on Rufus enough now. With Deponia, there's another character that goes by the name of Doc and shares a similar personality with Rufus. Here we can see that Doc's alcoholic tendencies highlight his main characteristics as we first see him under the influence of alcohol in the junkyard.
Can you see how everything gets more focused and how the colors are more lively?
Dr. Henry Yauman, professor at the University of Plymouth, relates alcoholism as the era when many working class members either had the moral strength to avoid alcohol or were vulnerable to excess usage. The Victorian temperance movement saw the consumption of alcohol as a wasteful experience and indicative of a struggling mindset. Dr. Yauman notes that it is important that this movement's promotion of the sober, respectable working man was necessary to curb typical working class stereotypes that reduce the quality of life for many. Unemployment and alcoholism are concepts that are present in both Victorian England and Laponia. These characteristics of the working class were a reminder to the workers of the status and ultimately restrains them from progressing further up the social hierarchy. We can see Laponia's focus on robots being a part of the upper class as analogous to the Victorian upper class, and the temperance movement focusing on how alcoholism should be treated to allow the man to be a reliable source of income. Finally, we look into the difference between the environment of Elysium, which represents that of the upper class, and Kuvak, which is inhabited by the lower class. The difference between the two environments is unsurprisingly quite drastic. When we examine Kuvak in relation to Elysium, we find that many different characteristics point to a great diversity between the classes. Since Laponia is entirely designed using a steampunk aesthetic, the player immediately associates the junk-filled world as a lower class environment. According to Jamie Go, author of Torrid's Chromatic Chronologies, the steampunk aesthetic represents the persecution that was present during the 19th century, as the theme uses a disorganized pattern of decoration. Since the player must interact with different objects in the game in order to complete puzzles, this aesthetic is completely embraced and utilized. In fact, the city from which the player must attempt to escape from Kuvak is viewed as a junkyard becomes symbolic of a struggling area that is not valued by society. The junkyard settings means that the player must build tools using surplus scrap rather than readily available supplies. Laponia attempts to relate this aesthetic to the working class as workers were forced to scrounge for supplies that would allow them to survive through daily life. In contrast to the lifestyle found in Laponia, Elysium is inferred to contain more refined elements as evidenced by the appearance of mosaics closer to the entrance of the city. Here we see the players interacting with mosaics in order to unlock one of the final steps in gaining access to Elysium. According to Bolter and Cruson, artists of remediation understanding new media, they analyze that when the player works with the mosaic instead of other junk element, the mosaic helps to remediate the narrative function of television and film by giving more than an optical value. What Bolter and Cruson is trying to say is that, with visual and interactive distinctions made by the player, the mosaic is able to help signify the difference between the junkyard of Kuvak and the auspicious nature of Elysium. Since such a sharp contrast exists between Kuvak and Elysium, the player becomes immersed in the working class environment and sees the difference that defines each. In essence, Laponia attempts to remind the player that class distinction is a major concept portrayed in the game's plot and should be understood with regards to the features of steampunk. As we can see from Laponia, players are able to have an interactive experience with understanding 19th century class distinction. It is likely that when video game developers were searching for a way to reach the heart of players, they fell back on the timeless characteristics present in much of our history. In this way, Laponia gives players a unique take on class distinction by incorporating a forced interactive plot that leads the player down a predetermined route, different landscapes in the trash-filled world compared to Elysium, and the occurrence of unemployment along with alcohol abuse, which are indicative of common class distinctions that were found in the 19th century. With these strategies, Laponia allows the player to truly experience the struggles of working class members. However, we must take caution when using a video game to make generalization about real life, as this may reduce the implication of certain periods and humorize them rather than give them proper attention.